If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you probably already know that I'm a big Harry Potter fan, and if you've been following Harry Potter news at all recently, you probably also already know that there is a live theatre play called Harry Potter and the Cursed Child that is opening really soon in London, and it is set 19 years after the events of the Battle of Hogwarts. Now, I was definitely one of those people who was glued to my computer the day that they released the first batch of tickets for the show. I'm lucky enough that I can go and see it in London, so I was just waiting for the counter of the queue to tick down and down and down, and finally I got my grubby little hands on some tickets, and I'm going to see the show at the very end of the previews at the end of July, and I'm incredibly excited that that is now under 2 months away. So I decided I would reread all 7 books, one per week, until I go and see the show, and that way I wouldn't be caught up with small details or things that I didn't remember or references that I didn't get, because that would be just the worst. I will be making videos about each book as I reread them, and also videos about the play once I see it, and about the script once it comes out for everybody to read on July the 31st. Let's get started with Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which I have just reread this week, and I had a few thoughts as I was rereading this. Most prominent of all was how impressed I was with how clearly Joe Rowling had planned a lot of the stuff that comes out in much later books in the series already. When you read this, it's quite obvious. I know it's something that everybody says when we read a Harry Potter book, but it's so striking how much of it already is there. And what was particularly striking to me was how lighthearted in tone it was, how funny it was, when there is already so much that is in place for the darker books to come. When I was reading this, I was reminded a lot of that difference in tone between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings books, where in The Hobbit, the ring that Bilbo finds is just a trinket that makes him invisible. By the time we get to the Lord of the Rings and Frodo puts the ring on, it's this evil thing that corrupts his soul, and you can see that if that had been established already in The Hobbit, it probably would have been quite a different book. It's already quite dark in places, but it retains this innocence because Bilbo retains his innocence and purity. And in this book, you can see already from the beginning that there is some really dark stuff going on. The scene in the forest where Voldemort drinks the unicorn blood, the scene at the very end where Quirrell reveals that Voldemort is in the back of his head, that stuff is really scary. I was reading this as a grown-up and finding it a little bit freaky, and I remembered listening to the audiobook of Philosopher's Stone in bed when I was supposed to be asleep with the lights all off, kind of pretending that I was sleeping and sneaking it a little bit more reading like that. And getting to that part where Quirrell takes the turban off, I just remember the terror of that moment and how wonderful that was. It's really nice to see that it still retains some of that. Now, we all love Hagrid, but when he comes to fetch Harry from the hut on the rock at sea, I was really surprised, keeping in mind the whole series and how important anti-Muggle discrimination is in the later books, to find that Hagrid uses Muggle as an insult to Uncle Vernon. "I'd like to see a great Muggle like you stop him," he said. "A what?" said Harry, interested. "A Muggle," said Hagrid. "It's what we call non-magic folk like them, and it's your bad luck you grew up in a family of the biggest Muggles I ever laid eyes on." It's not saying outright that Muggles are bad, it's not using the word mudblood, but it's using the word Muggle as an equation for a bad thing. That is an issue. That is something that you see in real life when people use words like gay as an insult. I find it really strange that Hagrid says that, but I guess Hagrid doesn't come across as that nasty at all, because right after he uses the word Muggle in that kind of offensive way, we come across Draco Malfoy, who introduces himself in the worst, most obnoxious way possible, and then proceeds to spout basically wizarding supremacist crap. He's in a shop, the shopkeeper is away, granted, but he's in a public place. And he's telling this kid who he doesn't know how he thinks Muggle-born children should not be allowed at Hogwarts at all. And it struck me, is that an acceptable thing to say in conversation in Wizarding Society? Because it doesn't seem like that from the rest of the book. So we have to wonder, is Draco just completely oblivious because he's only ever been in the society of his family who do hold these views? Or is he testing Harry? Is he trying to see how Harry is going to respond? Is he already on meeting someone straight up trying to get a rise out of them? Now, I think it's entirely possible that Draco had no idea how to behave in society, because later when all the first years arrive at Hogwarts and they're waiting to be sorted in a small antechamber outside of the Great Hall, they are all terrified of the sorting and what's going to happen. Ron, who's grown up with wizards his whole life, thinks that he's gonna have to fight a troll? Harry thinks that maybe he's gonna fail because he knows no magic and be expelled. Hermione thinks that she's going to have to use one of the spells that she's learned from learning all of her books by heart. And even Malfoy looks a little bit less confident than usual. And you have to wonder, how can none of them know what the sorting is? Harry, fine, he's just discovered he was a wizard. Hermione, fine, she's just discovered that she was a witch. But all of the others, all of the ones with wizarding families, how has no one spilled the beans? Are there 1 or 2 students in that crowd who know and kind of smugly keep it to themselves whilst they watch everybody else freaking out? Or is there some kind of Wizarding worldwide conspiracy to not tell children what the sorting is gonna be? Because Hermione tells them, like a page later, how she's read all about the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall in Hogwarts of History. But in Hogwarts of History, they don't seem to bother mentioning that the sorting is done by putting a hat on. I just really like the idea that everybody in the Wizarding world is working to troll Ickle first years and to just, you know, make them really afraid of the sorting. It's kind of mean, but I like it. Speaking of kind of mean, but I like it, it's Professor Snape time. He is a terrible human being and a terrible teacher and a fascinating character. And even if he were teaching the class, I still wish I could take potions. It has been so many years and I still get chills every time I hear that opening speech that Snape does about potions and what they do, whether it be Jim Dale, who does the US audiobooks, or Stephen Fry, who does the UK ones, or the best Snape to ever Snape, the late great Alan Rickman. I also love that we get to see the first bit of proper Harry snark in this book when Snape is grilling him completely out of the blue at the beginning of his potions lesson. I love that we get to see this side of Harry that we know is going to develop in later books, that kind of James Potter marauderish side of Harry show here for the first time in response to injustice, and it's not on his own behalf, it's on Hermione's behalf because she's raising her hand, she knows the answer, and Snape is blatantly ignoring her because he has his own agenda of hating Harry. It's like we get the mischievousness, the best of the marauders without getting the worst of them, the bullying. I also loved thinking about the marauders when Harry was sneaking out with the invisibility cloak and thinking how proud James and Remus and Sirius would be of Harry's rule breaking even in first year. Now, I already thought that the whole section with the Mirror of Erised was really sad in the book itself, but this illustration from the new Jim Kay illustrated edition, it finished me. It is so sad to see baby Harry leaning against the mirror like that, kind of needing that strength. Of course, right after that, Dumbledore tells Harry that he sees himself receiving a nice warm pair of socks for Christmas in the Mirror of Erised, which sounds like an obvious lie, and I wonder, what do you think that Dumbledore actually sees in the Mirror of Erised? I asked that question kind of jokingly on Twitter, but I really do wonder, would he see a version of Gellert Grindelwald who wasn't evil and who was able to stand by his side like he always wanted? Or would he see a version of himself, Dumbledore, who had never gone down this dark path as a young adult and who'd never kind of succumbed to that lore? A Dumbledore who'd never met Grindelwald, perhaps? Or would he be more focused on his sister Ariana? Would he see her alive and unharmed? For that one, I'm going to say probably, but what are the consequences of that? Would he see his father out of prison? Would he see the muggles who armed Ariana alive, not murdered by his father? Would he see all of Grindelwald's victims alive and not having perished? Or would he see all of Voldemort's victims alive, not having perished? Or would he see himself having defeated Voldemort once and for all like he did Grindelwald? Is it possible that he could see a few of those things at once and still see a pair of warm fuzzy winter socks somewhere in there in the mix? Is that like the one thing that he could tell Harry from what he saw in the mirror, or did he just completely make something up? Let me know what you think about that in the comments below, because the poll that I did on Twitter was a bit inconclusive. One thing that seemed a little bit out of the ordinary in this book compared to the next ones was how few points that teachers seem to be giving to each house or taking away from each house. It's all 1 point here, 5 points there. Even when Hermione lies and pretends that she went out to find a troll and fight him on her own, she only loses 5 points. And then Harry and Ron only get 5 points each for saving her, allegedly. We're even told at the end of the book that Neville's never earned a single point for Gryffindor, which is really silly because he has subjects in which he does well at school and he should at least be given points for efforts in his classes in general. Clearly, they are being a little bit skint on the points in this book, but then Professor McGonagall catches Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Draco out at night and just... it seems like it's the worst thing ever. She says she's never been more ashamed of Gryffindor. She says she's never seen 4 students out of bed at the same time. And it seems to me like that's a bit of an insult to the Marauders. They were at Hogwarts for a whole 7 years. Are you telling me, Minerva McGonagall, that the Marauders have never been all out of bed, all 4 of them at the same time in the 7 years that they were there? Or are you telling me that you never caught them? Because I find both of these scenarios really unlikely. I also find McGonagall's phrasing of "I've never been more ashamed of Gryffindor House" to be quite strange. Has she forgotten that one time where Sirius Black sent another student on the trail of his best friend the werewolf, potentially leading to the death of a student and making Remus a murderer? Because I feel like she should be more ashamed of that. And that makes me wonder, did McGonagall just never know that Sirius did that? Was Dumbledore the only person who knew that Sirius almost sent Snape to his death? In which case, McGonagall might find it really weird for Snape to hold on to his grudge to Lupin for all these years if she didn't know that one particular tidbit. But anyway, our heroes lose 50 whole points each for being out of bed at night. And my headcanon for this is that basically McGonagall found them all out of bed and thought to herself, it can't be either Hermione or Neville instigating this, it must be Harry's fault. And then suddenly she has this flash of remembering James, Sirius, Remus and Peter, and she realizes that this innocent, sweet Harry Potter is in fact the son of a marauder, and that she better try to curb his enthusiasm as early as she can by taking loads of points away from him. She does also tell them all that they're lucky they're still students at the school, which brings me to another thing that was really surprising in this book, was how many times the students were either told that they were about to be expelled, or that they were lucky they weren't expelled, or they worried really badly that they were going to be expelled. It's kind of a big deal when we don't know of any other magical schools in the country, and poor Harry, it's not just that he has no idea where else he could go to school, it's that he believes that if he were to be expelled, his wand would be snapped in half and he wouldn't be able to do magic anymore. That belief comes from the fact that the only person he knew who's been expelled was Hagrid, and Hagrid told him that his wand got snapped in half after he was expelled. Now, I understand completely why Hagrid decided to not introduce himself to Harry by saying, I'm not allowed to do magic anymore because I'm a convicted accessory to spider murder person, but don't worry, I'm innocent, I didn't do it, and I'm not dangerous. I completely understand why Hagrid didn't lead with that, but I do feel really bad for poor Harry, who gets threatened with expulsion about 10 times in this book and basically thinks that would lead him to not really being a wizard anymore. You know that bit at the end when Harry's under the invisibility cloak and he pretends to be the Bloody Baron to scare away Peeves? And Peeves is terrified. And it's kind of funny in this book, but think about it. Peeves is probably just terrified because he knows that the Bloody Baron is a straight up murderer. One thing that I loved about rereading this book was finding all these recurring themes and motifs that we know will be back in later books. And one really important theme of the series is people bringing about their own fate. And that comes up twice in the first time that Harry meets Draco and the first time that Harry meets Professor Snape. When they meet, Draco is absolutely horrendous to Harry, and that's a very strong contributing factor for Harry not ending up in Slytherin. When Harry has his first potion class with Snape, Snape goes on this rant telling Harry all about how he will be treated like a normal person and not the chosen one and not a celebrity in his class. However, just by doing that, Snape is singling Harry out. What's interesting about these two events is this strong case of the self-fulfilling prophecy, the character bringing about a certain fate that they were trying to avoid. Draco wanted Harry to be one of his cronies, and Snape wanted to tell Harry that he wasn't special. They fail in both of their attempts, in the same way that Voldemort completely fails to suppress the threat that is Harry, because when he goes out to try and eliminate Harry as a threat, he then marks him as his equal and ensures that Harry is able to one day defeat him. So there you have it already in book 1, an illustration of what becomes one of the strongest themes of the Harry Potter series. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. This book is pretty concise, all things considered. It's a really tightly told story, but we already have the main character dynamics in place of the characters we already know, and we already have Neville being a really strong secondary character. I didn't remember Neville being so present in this book, but on rereading, it's obvious that he's going to have such a bigger part in the narrative later, because apart from our main trio, Neville is one of the biggest student characters out there, along with Draco Malfoy, who is of course the antagonist. And that is of course no bad thing, because Neville is amazing and I cannot wait to see more of him in this reread and to see him becoming the badass hero that we know he is by the end of the series. And finally, I will leave you with this picture of tiny Harry from the illustrated edition. Look how small he is. So that's it. Those were my observations and feels about Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. I hope you enjoyed this probably epically long video. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment box below, and I will see you next week for the Chamber of Secrets. If you'd like to see more from me, check out the sidebar right here for more videos, and if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button for new videos from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.